In our national lead, the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are deepening their investigations into alleged fraud involving federal funds in Minnesota. Earlier,
federal fraud investigation in Minnesota took a new turn today. This time, agents are zeroing in on daycare centers and health clinics after a viral video touched off a firestorm.
Hello, we'd like to ask where the money's going. What do you guys think about the fraud that's taking place here in Minnesota?
I don't think anybody is enabling fraud to happen.
Hold Governor Walz accountable for this.
What was this money spent on? 1.26 million. What was that money spent on? There aren't any kids.
Answer the question. Are there children? There's no children inside this building.
In late December 2025, a video flickered to life on social media that would spark a firestorm and send federal law enforcement swarming through the snow-packed streets of Minneapolis. The camera followed a solitary figure touring row after row of storefronts with locked doors, empty parking lots, and faded signs that read, Daycare. The narrator's voice was unflinching. Taxpayer dollars, gone. To millions of viewers, this was more than an exposé. It was confirmation of something creeping beneath the surface of Minnesota's welfare system. Within days, the Department of Homeland Security and the FBI announced an escalating investigation of alleged fraud tied to social service programs and, significantly, linked to dozens of Somali-run enterprises and nonprofits.
The latest spotlight follows months of examples coming to light, including Feeding Our Future, which claimed to be providing 40,000 meals a week to children.
For a decade, Minnesota had been a national leader in social services. Food assistance, child care subsidies, disability services, housing support, funds meant for the vulnerable, the working poor, and families stretched thin. But in 2025, prosecutors began suggesting that a network of schemes had siphoned hundreds of millions, possibly billions, from these programs. And much of the public attention and political heat has focused on the Somali American community in the Twin Cities. Minnesota's most notorious case dates back to the COVID-19 pandemic. A nonprofit called Feeding Our Future registered with state and federal officials to provide free meals to children in underserved communities. Instead, prosecutors allege the group collected almost $250 million in federal reimbursements, money that was supposed to feed hungry families, but instead vanished into private pockets. Nearly all those charged in the case were Somali Americans, either immigrants or U.S. citizens, a fact that turned what should have been a local legal case into a national cultural flashpoint. Today, critics on both sides argue over how representative these defendants are of the wider community, but the fact of the convictions is on record. Like ripples from a stone thrown in a pond, one scandal led to another.
A lot of money there, and that same type of fraud Kirsten just told us about is exactly what led to an unprecedented crackdown in the state's autism program. Yesterday, 5 investigators revealed 85 autism centers in Minnesota are now under investigation.
Tonight, investigative reporter Ryan Raish is back with how suspected fraudsters are targeting millions of your hard-earned tax dollars.
Take a look at this graph showing the explosion in this program. This is the amount of money the state has paid in Medicaid claims to autism treatment providers using your tax dollars. You can see in 2017, not that much, just more than $1 million. But you see the gradual growth here. In 2021, more than $80 million. But look at last year, more than $220 million paid out in claims, with a grand total of just shy of $700 million. This is what state investigators are now looking at, these soaring costs, and questioning how many providers are doing real work.
State auditors observed a stunning rise in claims under Minnesota's Medicaid autism services, from roughly $3 million in 2018 to $399 million by 2023, with most such claims coming from providers linked to Somali communities in and around Minneapolis. According to prosecutors, many of these claims were fraudulent, services never rendered, diagnoses fabricated, and illegal kickbacks offered to families desperate for income. Meanwhile, fraudsters allegedly found ways to exploit housing stabilization programs, child care subsidies, interpreter services, transportation reimbursements, and other safety net streams, converting taxpayer dollars into untaxed cash, real estate purchases, and overseas transfers. These weren't clumsy grifters operating out of basement offices. Prosecutors described a sprawling industrial-scale fraud network with shell companies, fake billing, sham service providers, and coordinated money flows so intricate that investigators compared it to an underground economy. In state courtrooms, U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson called Minnesota a national poster child for public corruption, arguing that the system was gamed at scale and that hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars had simply vanished. The modern age of media means a single moment can send shockwaves through politics and law enforcement. That moment came with a video posted on Christmas week by independent investigator Nick Shirley. Armed with a camera and a confrontational style, Shirley's footage of allegedly empty daycares and taxpayer-funded nonprofits quickly went viral. It racked up millions of views on Twitter, YouTube, and other platforms, and was weaponized by political actors on both ends of the spectrum. To conservative commentators and some federal officials, the video was corroboration of years of anecdotal suspicion. To critics, however, it was a disputed narrative, blown out of proportion, and used to justify intensified law enforcement and immigration enforcement against a minority community. State regulators later reported that many of the centers shown were licensed and had been inspected, though these findings did not quiet public debate. Whether the video was an exposé or a provocation, it had consequences. Federal agencies sent dozens of special agents, analysts, and DHS personnel into Minnesota to pursue leads, interview suspects, and seize records. As the investigations expanded from food programs to Medicaid to childcare, the story bled into national politics. President Trump and Republican leaders seized on the fraud allegations, not merely as a law and order issue, but as a linchpin in broader critiques of immigration policy. They argued that lax enforcement of welfare rules enabled abuse and that Minnesota's Somali community illustrated a wider problem of immigrant exploitation of taxpayer systems. Some GOP lawmakers even called for denaturalization or deportation of those involved in fraud. At the same time, civil rights advocates and local Somali leaders warned against conflating the actions of fraud suspects with an entire community. They pointed out that the Somali diaspora includes thousands of law-abiding taxpayers, business owners, and civic leaders, and that broad characterizations risked inflaming xenophobia. These tensions spilled into state politics. In January 2026, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz abruptly announced he would not seek re-election, citing the need to focus on the crisis. But critics said the political pressure had simply become untenable. Even basic services have been affected. Federal authorities moved to freeze billions in childcare and social services funding for several states, citing fraud concerns, a move defenders called essential and opponents called punitive. For some observers, the story doesn't end in Minneapolis. In skeptical corners of the internet and on talk shows, claims circulated that funds siphoned from Minnesota might even be making their way to Somalia via informal money networks, and that some could ultimately benefit extremist groups. These narratives are unevidenced and disputed, and should not be treated as established fact, but they illustrate the volatility of public perception in such high-stakes scandals. Meanwhile, Somali American families in the Twin Cities have reported heightened scrutiny, harassment, and fear of retribution, a reminder that when crime stories intersect with race, religion, and immigration, reputations can be as fragile as trust. As 2026 begins, Minnesota stands at a crossroads. Federal and state investigators promise more indictments. Audits are underway, and prosecutors maintain that vast sums of public money were illegally taken from programs meant to help the vulnerable. At the same time, defenders of due process remind the public that investigations are ongoing, that allegations have not yet resulted in convictions in every case, and that widespread targeting of a single community can have long-lasting social costs. Whether this story becomes a cautionary tale about fraud, a warning about immigration policy, or a lesson in how headlines can outpace facts remains to be seen. What is clear is this: in the frozen corridors of Minnesota's welfare system, billions of taxpayer dollars were more than just numbers on a ledger. They became the currency of a national controversy, a political weapon, and a test of America's ability to pursue justice without prejudice.